It was a quiet evening in the suburbs, the kind of night where the air felt crisp and cool, and the streets were empty except for the occasional car passing by. Sarah Thompson, a well-respected woman in her community, was driving home after attending her weekly book club meeting. She loved these gatherings, a chance to unwind, share ideas, and connect with friends over cups of tea and laughter. That night, the group had discussed a novel about overcoming adversity, a theme that seemed far removed from Sarah's own life at the time. Little did she know, her own story of resilience was about to begin. As Sarah turned onto Maple Street, a familiar route she had driven countless times before, she noticed flashing red and blue lights in her rearview mirror. Her heart skipped a beat, but she remained calm. It wasn't uncommon for drivers to be pulled over in this area. It was known for strict enforcement of minor traffic violations. Sarah slowed down, signaled, and pulled her car carefully to the side of the road. She turned off the engine, rolled down her window, and waited patiently, her hands resting on the steering wheel just as she had always been taught. The officer approached her vehicle, his boots crunching softly against the pavement. His partner stayed near the patrol car, leaning casually against the hood while keeping an eye on Sarah's SUV. The first officer tapped lightly on her window, and Sarah looked up to see him standing there, his expression unreadable behind his dark sunglasses despite the fading light of day. "License and registration, please," he said curtly, his tone lacking any warmth or politeness. Sarah nodded politely and reached into her purse for her wallet. As she handed over her documents, the officer glanced at her name on the license. Sarah Thompson. He froze for a moment, then exchanged a glance with his partner. Something shifted in the atmosphere. The casualness of the stop vanished, replaced by tension so thick it was almost palpable. "Is there a problem, officer?" Sarah asked gently, trying to ease the growing unease. "I thought I might have missed the stop sign back there, but I'm happy to clarify." Instead of answering her question, the officer began peppering her with more questions. "Do you know who your husband is?" he asked, his voice sharp now, almost accusatory. Sarah blinked in confusion. "Yes, of course. He's James Thompson. Why do you ask?" The second officer chimed in, walking closer to Sarah's car. "You think being married to someone important gives you special privileges? You think you're above the law?" His words came out harsh, cutting through the stillness of the evening like a knife. Sarah felt a knot forming in her stomach. She hadn't expected this reaction. "I don't understand," she replied, her voice steady but tinged with concern. "I'm not claiming any privilege. I made a mistake. If I did roll through the stop sign, I'll gladly pay the fine. There's no need for hostility here." But the officers weren't listening. Their demeanor grew increasingly aggressive, their voices rising with every word. One of them accused her of acting entitled, while the other muttered under his breath about people like her. Sarah couldn't help but notice how different this interaction felt compared to previous encounters with law enforcement. This wasn't just a routine traffic stop anymore. It had morphed into something else entirely, something deeply unsettling. Despite her attempts to remain composed, Sarah could feel panic creeping in. She tried reasoning with them, explaining that she was simply trying to cooperate and resolve the situation peacefully, but nothing seemed to work. Every attempt to de-escalate only seemed to fuel their anger further. Then, without warning, one of the officers ordered her to step out of the car. Sarah hesitated, unsure of what was happening. "Why am I being asked to leave my vehicle?" she questioned, her voice trembling slightly. The officer didn't answer. Instead, he yanked open her door and grabbed her arm, pulling her out forcefully. Sarah stumbled, caught off guard by the sudden movement. "What's going on?" she demanded, her fear giving way to frustration. "This isn't right. I haven't done anything wrong." Her protests fell on deaf ears. Within moments, she found herself in handcuffs, the cold metal biting into her wrists. The officers ignored her pleas to call her husband or a lawyer, dismissing her requests as though they carried no weight. They shoved her into the back seat of their patrol car, slamming the door shut behind her. As they drove away, Sarah stared out the window, tears streaming down her face. How had things spiraled so quickly out of control? The ride to the police station felt endless, each mile stretching longer than the last. Sarah's mind raced with questions. Was this really happening? Had her identity somehow triggered this treatment? And what would happen next? Despite her shock and fear, one thought kept repeating itself in her head. This can't stand. Whatever the outcome of this ordeal, Sarah knew she wouldn't let it go unanswered. For now, though, all she could do was sit in silence, clutching the edge of the seat as the city lights blurred past outside. At the police station, Sarah sat alone in a cold, dimly lit room. The fluorescent lights buzzed faintly overhead, casting an unforgiving glow on the cracked walls and worn-out chairs. Her hands were still cuffed, and though the officers had removed them shortly after her arrival, the memory of the metal pressing against her skin lingered like a phantom ache. She felt numb, partly from shock, partly from disbelief that this was her reality. A woman who had always followed the rules, paid her taxes, and contributed positively to her community, was now sitting in a holding cell over what should have been a minor traffic violation. As the hours dragged on, Sarah's mind raced. She replayed the events of the evening over and over again, trying to pinpoint where things had gone so horribly wrong. Had she said something to provoke the officers? No, she realized. Her tone had been calm, respectful, even apologetic. Yet their behavior toward her had been anything but professional. Their words echoed in her head. People like you. Think you're above the law. What did they mean by that? Was it her name? Her husband's position as FBI director? Or was there something deeper, uglier at play here? Finally, after what felt like an eternity, Sarah was allowed to make a phone call. Her fingers trembled as she dialed James's number, her heart pounding with a mix of relief and dread. When, he answered, his voice immediately softened upon hearing hers. Sarah, are you okay? He asked, concern evident in every syllable. I don't know, Sarah replied, her voice cracking under the weight of everything she'd endured. She explained what had happened, the stop, the accusations, the arrest, and listened as James grew increasingly angry on the other end of the line. This isn't right, he said firmly. I'll handle it. Stay strong, sweetheart. We'll get through this together. James wasted no time. Within minutes, he contacted his colleagues at the FBI, ensuring that Sarah would be released, promptly and treated fairly during the process. Word of the incident spread quickly among their close-knit circle of friends and family. By morning, it wasn't just a private matter anymore. It was public news. Reporters began calling, eager for details about why the wife of one of the nation's most prominent law enforcement officials had been arrested under such bizarre circumstances. The story gained traction when footage of the traffic stop surfaced. A neighbor's security camera had captured the entire encounter, showing how the officer's demeanor shifted dramatically once they saw Sarah's last name on her license. In the video, Sarah appeared polite and cooperative throughout, while the officers escalated unnecessarily, shouting accusations and using physical force to remove her from the car. The clip went viral almost instantly, sparking outrage across social media platforms. Viewers were quick to draw parallels between Sarah's experience and countless others involving racial profiling and excessive force. While Sarah herself was not a person of color, many pointed out that the officer's behavior mirrored patterns often directed at black and brown individuals during routine stops. Activists highlighted the incident as yet another example of systemic issues within policing, arguing that if someone as privileged as Sarah could be treated this way, imagine what marginalized communities face daily. Protests erupted outside, the police department with hundreds gathering to demand accountability. Signs read slogans like "Justice for Sarah" and "End Police Brutality." Community leaders took to podiums, urging reform and transparency. Civil rights organizations called for an independent investigation into the officer's conduct, emphasizing the need for systemic change rather than isolated punishments. Meanwhile, Sarah tried to process the whirlwind unfolding around her. Friends and supporters flooded her phone with messages of solidarity, offering comfort and encouragement. But amidst the chaos, She couldn't shake the feeling that this moment carried greater significance than just her personal ordeal. This wasn't just about her. It was about everyone who had ever felt powerless against authority, everyone who had been dismissed or dehumanized because of prejudice or bias. James stood by her side every step of the way, balancing his role as a devoted husband with his responsibilities as a public figure. He held a press conference, addressing the nation with a mixture of anger and resolve. "What happened to my wife is unacceptable," he declared, his voice steady but laced with emotion. "No one deserves to be treated this way, regardless of who they are or what they represent. This incident shines a light on deeper issues within our system, issues we can no longer ignore." His words resonated deeply, striking a chord with people from all walks of life. Politicians weighed in, some condemning the officer's actions outright, while others urged caution until all facts were known. Late-night talk show hosts joked about the absurdity of arresting the FBI director's wife, but beneath the humor lay a sobering truth. This wasn't funny. It was a symptom of a much larger problem. As days turned into weeks, the pressure mounted on the police department to take action. Internal investigations were launched and disciplinary hearings scheduled. Yet despite the mounting evidence against them, the two officers remained unrepentant. During interviews with their superiors, they doubled down on their version of events, insisting they had acted appropriately and accusing Sarah of resisting lawful orders. Their defiance only fueled public fury, turning what might have been a contained scandal into a national debate about accountability and justice. For Sarah, the attention was overwhelming. She appreciated the support, but struggled with the idea of becoming a symbol for something bigger than herself. Still, she recognized the opportunity before her. If sharing her story could spark meaningful conversations and lead to real change, then perhaps her suffering wouldn't be in vain. With James's encouragement, she began speaking out, giving interviews and attending rallies alongside activists and advocates. Each appearance reinforced her determination to fight back, not just for herself, but for everyone who had ever felt silenced or mistreated by those sworn to protect them. As she stood before crowds, microphone in hand, Sarah found strength she didn't know she had. Her voice grew steadier, her message clearer. This wasn't just about one bad night. It was about dismantling the structures that allowed such nights to happen in the first place. And so, as the legal battles loomed ahead and the spotlight intensified, Sarah prepared herself for the long road to come. She knew the journey wouldn't be easy, but she also knew she wasn't alone. With her husband by her side, her community rallying behind her, and a growing army of supporters nationwide, she vowed to see this fight through to the end. Whatever challenges lay ahead, Sarah Thompson was ready to face them, one step at a time. As the days turned into weeks, the story of Sarah Thompson's arrest continued to dominate headlines. The public outrage showed no signs of fading, and the pressure on the police department to take decisive action grew stronger with each passing day. Yet amidst all the noise and demands for accountability, one thing became glaringly clear. The two officers at the center of the controversy were not backing down. Their refusal to apologize or acknowledge any wrongdoing shocked even seasoned observers of law enforcement scandals. The internal hearings held by the police department revealed just how entrenched their defiance was. When questioned about their behavior during the traffic stop, both officers stuck to their original narrative, claiming they had acted professionally and within the bounds of the law. They argued that Sarah's demeanor had been confrontational from the start, though video evidence directly contradicted this claim. She wasn't cooperative, one officer stated flatly, his tone dismissive. We gave her multiple chances to comply, but she kept arguing with us. Their defense attorney echoed these sentiments in a press briefing, attempting to paint Sarah as someone who had used her privilege to challenge authority. This isn't about race or bias, the lawyer insisted. It's about enforcing the law. If every person decided they could talk back to officers, our streets would descend into chaos. This argument fell flat for many, especially when juxtaposed against the calm and respectful demeanor Sarah displayed in the security footage. Critics pointed out that if Sarah, an educated, well-spoken woman married to the FBI director, could be treated this way, it spoke volumes about how much worse things might be for individuals without her resources or connections. What made the situation even more shocking was the officer's decision to reject an offer of leniency. During closed-door discussions with their superiors, they were presented with an option to issue a public apology and accept a suspension without pay. Such a resolution would have allowed them to keep their jobs while acknowledging some level of misjudgment. But instead of taking the opportunity to mitigate the damage, the officers dug in their heels. They refused outright, declaring that they stood by their actions and saw no reason to apologize. When asked why they rejected the compromise, one officer reportedly said, "I'm not going to grovel because people don't like what they see. We did our job, and if that means losing it, so be it." His words reverberated through the media, sparking heated debates across dinner tables, social media platforms, and news outlets. Some viewed their stance as admirable, a sign of unwavering conviction. Others saw it as stubborn arrogance, a bold refusal to admit fault even when faced with overwhelming evidence. Their choice to prioritize pride over reconciliation came with consequences. Facing mounting criticism, the police department suspended the officers indefinitely pending further investigation. However, the officers took matters into their own hands, opting to resign rather than face potential termination. Their resignation, letters leaked to the press shortly afterward, doubled down on their earlier statements. "We will not apologize for doing what we believed was right," one letter read. "If standing up for ourselves means sacrificing our careers, then so be it." This move sent shockwaves through the law enforcement community. Veteran officers expressed dismay, warning that such inflexibility damaged the already fragile relationship between police forces and the public. "This is exactly the kind of behavior that makes people lose trust in us," said a retired detective in an interview. "You can disagree all you want, but when there's video evidence showing misconduct, you need to own up to it. Otherwise, you're proving everyone's worst fears about cops being above accountability." For Sarah, watching the officers dig in their heels only reinforced her resolve to fight back. She understood that this wasn't just about her anymore. It was about sending a message. If two officers could act this way toward someone with her profile and still refuse to acknowledge any wrongdoing, imagine how easily others could get away with similar behavior toward more vulnerable members of society. James, too, felt the weight of the moment. As FBI director, he had spent years advocating for justice and fairness within the system. Now he found himself grappling with the harsh reality that even those tasked with upholding the law could falter under the influence of prejudice or ego. He knew that addressing this issue required more than firing a couple of rogue officers. It demanded systemic reforms that tackled the root causes of such behavior. In the midst of the turmoil, Sarah began channeling her energy into activism. She attended town hall meetings, sharing her story with anyone willing to listen. At first, speaking publicly about her experience was daunting. The memories of that night still haunted her, the sound of the handcuffs clicking shut, the sting of the officer's accusations, the feeling of helplessness as she sat in the back of the patrol car. But as she connected with others who had endured similar injustices, she found a sense of purpose. One particularly moving moment came during a community forum where Sarah shared the stage with activists from marginalized communities. A young black man named Marcus recounted being pulled over repeatedly for minor infractions, often without cause. "Every time I get stopped, I think about my mom," he said, his voice trembling. "I wonder if this is the time something bad happens. And now, seeing what happened to Mrs. Thompson, it proves that none of us are safe no matter who we are." Sarah listened intently, her heart breaking with each word. Afterward, she approached Marcus and thanked him for sharing his story. "Your courage inspires me," she told him. "If anything good comes out of this, I hope it's that we can stand together and demand change, not just for me, but for everyone who deserves better." Her growing involvement in advocacy work earned her both praise and criticism. Supporters hailed her as a champion for justice, applauding her willingness to use her platform to amplify voices that often went unheard. Detractors, however, accused her of grandstanding, suggesting that she was exploiting her privilege to gain attention. But Sarah brushed off the negativity, focusing instead on the positive impact she could make. Behind the scenes, legal teams were preparing for the next phase of the battle. Sarah filed a lawsuit against the officers and the police department, alleging racial profiling, excessive force, and violations of her civil rights. The case quickly gained traction, drawing interest from high-profile attorneys eager to represent her pro bono. One of them, renowned civil rights lawyer Rachel Mendez, agreed to lead the charge. "This isn't just about Sarah," Rachel explained in a press conference. "It's about holding institutions accountable and ensuring that no one else has to endure what she went through." As preparations for the trial moved forward, Sarah found herself reflecting on the journey she'd embarked upon. From the quiet book club member living a peaceful life to a national figurehead for reform, her transformation had been swift and unexpected. Yet despite the challenges, she felt a deep sense of gratitude. Gratitude for the support she'd received, for the lessons she'd learned, and for the opportunity to contribute to a cause greater than herself. And so, as the legal proceedings loomed ahead and the spotlight remained firmly fixed on her, Sarah braced herself for whatever came next. She knew the road wouldn't be easy, but she also knew she wasn't walking it alone. With James by her side, her newfound allies in the fight for justice, and a determination that burned brighter with each passing day, she vowed to see this through to the end. Whatever the outcome, Sarah Thompson was ready to stand tall and to continue fighting for a world where fairness prevailed. The courtroom was packed on the day Sarah Thompson's lawsuit went to trial. Reporters, activists, and curious citizens filled every seat, their eyes fixed on the proceedings with rapt attention. The case had become a symbol of something much larger than one woman's experience. It represented the fight for accountability, fairness, and systemic change within law enforcement. For Sarah, stepping into that courtroom felt like entering uncharted territory. She had never imagined herself at the center of such a high-stakes legal battle, but here she was, determined to see it through. As the trial began, both sides presented their arguments with precision and passion. Sarah's legal team, led by Rachel Mendez, laid out a compelling narrative. They highlighted the officer's disproportionate response during the traffic stop, pointing to the security footage as undeniable proof of misconduct. Rachel's voice rang clear and commanding as she addressed the jury. "This isn't just about a missed stop sign," she said. "It's about how power is wielded and abused when those sworn to protect us choose intimidation over justice." Rachel walked the jury through each moment of the encounter, pausing to emphasize key details. She pointed out how the officers escalated the situation unnecessarily, ignored Sarah's attempts to cooperate, and ultimately resorted to physical force without justification. She also introduced evidence from past complaints filed against the officers, revealing a pattern of aggressive behavior toward civilians, particularly those from marginalized communities. These documents painted a troubling picture of two individuals who seemed to operate above the law, shielded by badges that were meant to represent integrity and service. On the other side, the defense argued fiercely to protect the officers' actions. Their attorney portrayed Sarah as someone who had deliberately provoked the officers, framing her polite questions as acts of defiance. He repeatedly emphasized the phrase, "enforcing the law," suggesting that any criticism of the officers undermined their ability to do their jobs effectively. "Law enforcement requires authority," he told the jury. "If we start second-guessing every decision an officer makes, we risk chaos on our streets." But his arguments struggled to hold water in the face of the overwhelming evidence stacked against him. The video footage spoke for itself, showing Sarah remaining calm and respectful throughout the interaction, while the officers grew increasingly hostile. Witnesses called by Sarah's team, including neighbors who had seen the arrest, unfold, and experts on police conduct, further dismantled the defense's claims. One expert testified that the officers' behavior deviated significantly from standard protocols, describing their actions as reckless and unnecessary. For Sarah, sitting through the trial was emotionally draining. Every time the footage played or the details of that night were recounted, she felt the weight of the experience crash over her again, yet she refused to let it break her. Instead, she leaned on the support of her husband, James, and the growing network of allies she had gained since the incident. Friends and family attended the trial daily, offering quiet encouragement from the gallery. Activists held vigils outside the courthouse, holding signs that read "Justice for All" and "Accountability Matters." Their presence reminded Sarah that this wasn't just her fight. It belonged to everyone who believed in a fairer, more equitable society. As the days passed, the trial took unexpected turns. During cross-examination, Rachel pressed one of the officers relentlessly, forcing him to admit inconsistencies in his testimony. When asked why he hadn't accepted the offer to apologize and avoid termination, the officer responded defensively, saying, "I won't apologize for standing my ground." His words drew audible gasps from the audience, underscoring the disconnect between his perspective and the public's expectations of accountability. By the time closing arguments arrived, tensions in the courtroom were palpable. Rachel delivered a powerful final statement, urging the jury to consider not only Sarah's case but the broader implications of their verdict. "What happens here matters," she said, her voice steady yet impassioned. "It sends a message about what kind of behavior we tolerate from those in positions of power. Will we allow fear and prejudice to dictate how laws are enforced? Or will we demand better, for Sarah, for her community, and for everyone watching?" Today, when the jury finally retired to deliberate, the wait felt endless. Hours stretched into what felt like days as Sarah paced nervously outside the courtroom, surrounded by her loved ones. Finally, the foreperson emerged, clutching the verdict sheet. As the judge read the decision aloud, a wave of relief washed over Sarah. The jury had ruled in her favor, finding the officers guilty of violating her rights and awarding her substantial damages. Cheers erupted from the crowd and tears streamed down Sarah's face as she hugged James tightly. But the victory wasn't just personal. It carried profound political ramifications. In the wake of the ruling, lawmakers scrambled to address the systemic issues exposed by the case. Bills aimed at increasing police accountability began making their way through Congress with bipartisan support. Some proposed mandatory body cameras for all officers, while others advocated for independent oversight boards to review cases of misconduct. Local governments revisited their policing policies, implementing reforms designed to rebuild trust between law enforcement and the communities they served. Despite these strides, challenges remained. While the trial had exposed the flaws in the system, fixing them required sustained effort and commitment. Critics warned against complacency, reminding the public that one verdict wouldn't erase decades of injustice. "This is a step forward," said a civil rights leader during a televised panel discussion. "But true change takes time, resources, and unwavering dedication. We can't afford to lose momentum now." For the officers involved, the consequences were severe. Though they avoided prison due to the specifics of the charges, their careers were irreparably damaged. Their refusal to apologize continued to haunt them, turning them into pariahs within the law enforcement community. Former colleagues distanced themselves, embarrassed by the negative attention the case had brought to their profession. Meanwhile, the police department implemented new training programs focused on de-escalation techniques, implicit bias awareness, and community engagement. Leaders vowed to foster a culture of transparency and accountability, though skeptics questioned whether real transformation could occur without deeper structural changes. Sarah, meanwhile, found herself reflecting on the journey that had brought her here. From the quiet evenings spent discussing novels with friends to standing before crowds advocating for reform, her life had taken a dramatic turn. But she didn't regret a single moment of it. Through her ordeal, she had discovered a strength she never knew she possessed, a determination to fight not just for herself, but for others who lacked a voice. Her advocacy work expanded beyond local efforts. She partnered with organizations dedicated to criminal justice reform, traveling across the country to share her story and amplify marginalized voices. At rallies, conferences, and town halls, she urged people to remain vigilant, to hold institutions accountable, and to believe in the possibility of progress. "Change doesn't happen overnight," she often said. But if we keep pushing, keep demanding better, we can create a future where everyone is treated with dignity and respect. As the months rolled on, Sarah's influence continued to grow. She became a trusted figure in the movement for reform, admired for her resilience and authenticity. Those scars from that fateful night lingered. They no longer defined her. Instead, they fueled her mission to ensure that no one else would suffer the same fate. And as she stood before supporters, rallying them to keep fighting, Sarah knew she was exactly where she was meant to be, on the front lines of a battle worth waging, one step closer to a world built on fairness and justice. The victory in court marked the end of one chapter for Sarah Thompson, but it was far from the conclusion of her journey. If anything, the verdict served as a catalyst, propelling her into a new phase of advocacy that would define her life in ways she never anticipated. The legal battle had been exhausting, both emotionally and physically, but it also illuminated the power of resilience and collective action. For Sarah, this wasn't just about closure. It was about using her experience to drive meaningful change. In the weeks following the trial, Sarah found herself reflecting deeply on what justice truly meant. Winning the case brought a sense of vindication, yes, but it didn't erase the pain or undo the harm caused by the officer's actions. Justice, she realized, wasn't solely about punishing those who did wrong. It was about creating systems that prevented such injustices from happening in the first place. With this understanding, Sarah committed herself fully to becoming an agent of transformation, dedicating her time and energy to building bridges between communities and law enforcement. Her first step was founding an organization called Pathways to Trust, a nonprofit aimed at addressing systemic issues within policing and fostering accountability. The name reflected her belief that trust could be rebuilt, not overnight but through consistent effort and open dialogue. Sarah envisioned the group as a resource for victims of police misconduct, offering legal support, counseling services, and platforms for sharing stories. She also wanted it to serve as a training hub for officers seeking to improve their interactions with the public, emphasizing empathy, de-escalation, and cultural sensitivity. Launching Pathways to Trust required immense dedication. Sarah spent countless hours meeting with experts, drafting proposals, and securing funding. James supported her every step of the way, leveraging his connections within government agencies and law enforcement circles to help amplify the organization's mission. Together, they assembled a team of passionate individuals, activists, lawyers, former officers, and community leaders who shared Sarah's vision for reform. One of the organization's earliest initiatives was hosting workshops in cities across the country. These events brought together diverse groups of people, community members, police officers, policymakers, and activists, to engage in honest conversations about policing practices and mutual expectations. At one such workshop in Chicago, Sarah stood before a packed auditorium, her voice steady as she addressed the audience. "We're here today because we believe in the possibility of change," she said. "It won't always be easy, and there will be moments when progress feels slow. But if we commit to listening to each other, learning from our mistakes, and working together, I know we can build a better future." The workshops proved transformative for many participants. Officers walked away with fresh perspectives on how their actions impacted civilians, while community members gained insight into the challenges faced by law enforcement. One officer, a veteran with over 20 years of service, approached Sarah after a session in Atlanta. "I've been doing this job for decades," he admitted, "but hearing these stories has made me realize how much work we still have to do. Thank you for giving us a space to grow." Sarah's efforts extended beyond workshops. She collaborated with schools, universities, and grassroots organizations to develop educational programs focused on civic engagement and social justice. Through partnerships with local libraries, she launched book clubs similar to the one she used to attend, encouraging participants to read works centered around themes of equality, fairness, and human rights. These initiatives created safe spaces for dialogue, allowing people to connect over shared values and aspirations. Despite the progress, not everyone welcomed Sarah's work with open arms. Critics accused her of being naive, arguing that her Privileged background shielded her from the harsh realities faced by marginalized communities daily. Others dismissed her efforts as performative, claiming she was merely capitalizing on her fame to boost her image. While the criticism stung, Sarah refused to let it deter her. Instead, she leaned into the feedback, inviting skeptics to join the conversation and challenge her ideas. "If someone thinks I'm getting it wrong, I want to hear why," she told a reporter during an interview. "This movement isn't about me. It's about all of us finding solutions together." As months turned into years, Sarah's influence continued to expand. Her story inspired others to share their own experiences, sparking a ripple effect of courage and solidarity. A young woman named Maria, who had once hesitated to speak out about being racially profiled during a traffic stop, credited Sarah with giving her the confidence to come forward. "Seeing someone like Mrs. Thompson stand up and say, 'This isn't right,' made me realize I didn't have to stay silent," Maria explained during a panel discussion hosted by Pathways to Trust. "Now I'm part of a community that lifts each other up, and that's powerful." Sarah's advocacy also caught the attention of policymakers at the highest levels. Invited to testify before Congress, she delivered a poignant speech urging lawmakers to prioritize police reform legislation. Standing at the podium, she recounted her own experience while highlighting the stories of countless others whose voices had long gone unheard. "Every person deserves to feel safe in their community," she said, her voice trembling with emotion. "Every child deserves to grow up believing that justice is blind, that it doesn't see race, class, or status. Let's make that dream a reality." Her testimony resonated deeply, contributing to the passage of landmark reforms aimed at increasing transparency, improving training standards, and establishing independent oversight bodies. Though the laws represented significant progress, Sarah knew they were only pieces of a larger puzzle. True change, she believed, depended on changing hearts and minds, a process that couldn't be rushed or mandated. By the 5th anniversary of her arrest, Sarah had become a household name synonymous with resilience and hope. Yet she remained humble, often deflecting praise onto the thousands of people who had joined her in the fight for justice. "I didn't do this alone," she frequently reminded audiences. "This movement belongs to everyone who has ever dared to demand better, for themselves, for their families, and for generations to come." On the night of the anniversary, Sarah attended a celebration organized by Pathways to Trust. The event brought together activists, supporters, and survivors of police misconduct, all united by a shared commitment to creating a fairer world. As Sarah took the stage to deliver closing remarks, the room fell silent, every eye fixed on her. "When I look back on that night 5 years ago," she began, her voice soft yet resolute, "I think about fear, the kind that grips your chest and makes you question everything you thought you knew. But I also think about hope, the kind that whispers, even in the darkest moments, that things can get better. That night changed my life forever, but it taught me something invaluable. None of us are powerless. We all have the ability to shape the world around us, one act of courage at a time." As applause erupted, Sarah stepped down from the stage, surrounded by loved ones and allies. She felt a profound sense of gratitude, not just for the victories achieved, but for the journey itself. It had been messy, painful, and uncertain at times, but it had also been beautiful. Through her struggle, she had discovered a purpose bigger than herself, a calling to leave the world a little kinder, a little fairer than she had found it. And so, as the evening drew to a close and fireworks lit up the sky, Sarah allowed herself a moment of quiet reflection. She thought about the road ahead, knowing full well that challenges would continue to arise. But she also knew this: as long as there were people willing to stand up, speak out, and fight for what was right, the dream of justice would endure. For Sarah Thompson, that knowledge was enough to keep moving forward, one step, one story, one heartbeat at a time.